show me the way to the next whiskey bar.
Was Jim Morrison bisexual? What about the allegations of abuse? Jim Morrison's life was marked by intense contradictions, and many aspects of his personal history remain shrouded in mystery. Among these are claims about his sexual orientation and the disturbing allegations about his upbringing. One of the most persistent allegations surrounding Morrison's sexuality comes from his biography, Jim Morrison, Life, Death, Legend, by Stephen Davis. In the book, Davis suggests that Jim may have been bisexual, or at the very least, had a preference for certain sexual practices. Davis includes multiple insinuations, one of which claims that Morrison was a backdoor man, referring to his sexual relationships with women, including his longtime companion Pam Courson. Davis also touches on rumors of a man named Freddie, whom Jim allegedly had sexual relations with. According to Davis, drummer John Densmore suspected Freddie, a sleazy groupie who leached off Jim, of engaging in intimate acts with Morrison. However, no definitive evidence for these claims has ever surfaced, and some believe that these details may have been embellished for dramatic effect or to sell books. Besides what Davis claimed about what Densmore suspected, I couldn't find anything that any other members of the Doors said about Jim's sexuality. Additionally, Beverly Hills attorney Max Fink, who worked on Jim's legal issues during the Miami trial in 1969, claims that during a debriefing session with Jim, he asked why Morrison had exposed himself on stage in Florida. The transcript of their conversation suggests that Morrison may have made a cryptic comment, stating he did it as a way to pay homage to his parents. Jim allegedly went on to claim that he had been molested by someone close to his family when he was a boy. According to the interview, when Jim tried to confide in his mother about this, she reportedly reacted angrily and called him a liar, something Morrison said he could never forgive her for. The Morrison family has denied these allegations, and there has been no concrete evidence to support them. Moreover, a 1997 memoir by Linda Ashcroft Wildchild, Life with Jim Morrison, contained an allegation that Jim had been sexually abused by his father. Ashcroft claims that Jim told her he was punished and raped by his father after missing dinner one night. This claim was removed from the American edition of the book in 1998 for legal reasons, casting further doubt on its veracity. While the allegations of sexual abuse and Morrison's sexuality remain controversial, it's essential to recognize that much of this is speculation, and there is no definitive proof to confirm or deny these claims. Given the personal nature of the allegations and the mixed responses from those who knew Morrison, it's difficult to say for certain what was true. The existence of such stories in biographies and memoirs could be driven by a desire to sell books or sensationalize aspects of Morrison's life. The details of Jim Morrison's personal life remain shrouded in mystery. One thing was clear: his creative genius was undeniable. It was on the sun-soaked sands of Venice Beach in 1965 where this raw, complicated soul would meet Ray Manzarek, setting in motion the formation of the Doors and a journey that would define rock and roll history. Ray thought Jim's lyrics were incredible, and he asked if Jim had anything else. Jim mentioned a couple other songs that would be on the first two albums. In Light My Fire, Ray recounts what happened next. I told Jim, "These are the best songs I've ever heard. With your lyrics and my keyboards, we need a band." Laughing, I added, "We're gonna make $1 million." He looked at me and said, "That's exactly what I had in mind." Then I said, "There's just one problem." He frowned. "What problem?" "We need a band name. We're not calling it Morrison and Manzarek." He replied, "We call it The Doors." "The what?" I asked, then paused as it clicked. "Like the doors in your mind? Like Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception?" "Exactly," he said. Ray was in a band with his brothers called Rick and the Ravens. One day, Ray invited over a drummer he knew, John Densmore. John entered the garage rehearsal room and met the band. Then he saw someone lurking in the corner of the garage. wearing standard collegiate brown cords, a brown t-shirt and bare feet. Ray introduced him as Jim, the singer. John says 21-year-old Morrison was shy. Jim said hello and went back in the corner. Ray handed John a piece of paper and suggested he read some of Jim's lyrics. John read some of the lyrics to Break On Through, and they began to jam. They continued practicing with Ray's brothers for a bit. Eventually they quit and they needed a guitar player. John brought Bill Wolf over to rehearse, but he didn't seem to fit. John brought Robbie Krieger, with whom he played with in the Psychedelic Rangers. In his book, Set the Night on Fire, Robbie tells the story of his audition for The Doors. I had already met everyone in the band and had a copy of their 6-song demo, so no introductions were necessary. The first song we played together was Moonlight Drive, my favorite of the demo tracks. The version was bluesier and bouncier than the one we later recorded, with Jim singing in a higher register. I played along, then asked to try something different. I slipped on my bottleneck and added a warbling slide riff as we went through the song again. My flamenco finger-picking and Muddy Waters style bottlenecking seemed to set me apart. Jim loved the sound and said the Doors should use the bottleneck on every song. That's why I got the gig over Wolf. It only took one song to know it felt right. Fast forward to playing at the London Fog, just a half block down the street from the Whiskey A Go-Go. Not the worst place John and Robbie found on their quest to find gigs. Robbie says they walked in at the exact right moment. The owner gave them a shot and they eventually played 6 nights a week, 4 sets a night for $5 each. They had so much time to kill. They were able to jam and foster their chemistry together. According to Robbie, the first Doors album was written in that bar as much as their practice spot and within Jim's head. The London Fog is also where Pam comes into the picture. John Densmore would hit on her before Jim ever met her. Jim obviously won her interest, which was good. It seemed Jim had finally met someone who could walk on the edge right alongside him. The Doors paid their dues at the London Fog, then the next step found them. Ronnie Horan. Ronnie was the booker at the Whiskey A Go-Go. Ronnie offered them a spot at the Whiskey the same night they got fired from the Fog. It's at the Whiskey where Jim's true confidence as a performer took hold. They performed sometimes with other bands and watched the bands they opened for. They observed the ingredients from each band to become the band they were destined to be. Then we come to the infamous night they played the Oedipal part of the song, The End. In Set the Night on Fire, Robbie recalls a night at the Whiskey when Jim hadn't shown up. He'd never missed a show before, and the only time he had before was when he'd been arrested, so the band was worried. They played the first set without him, then split up to search the city. Ray and John found Jim at the Tropicana Motel, cowering under a bed and claiming to have taken 10,000 mics of acid. They got him back to the Whiskey, where Jim demanded they play The End. Mid-song, Jim improvised new lyrics that had never been heard before. The crowd was mesmerized as Jim's performance grew intense, reaching the famous Oedipal scream. The band followed his lead, bringing the song to a dramatic climax. Afterward, there was a long silence, then the loudest applause they'd ever heard. Despite rumors of being fired for the Oedipal imagery, Robbie recalls no anger from the crowd or staff. The band played a few more nights, and it was the end of their contract, not the scandal that led to their departure. They knew that night had given The End its final piece, and they had to get it on vinyl. After that memorable night at the Whiskey, the Doors were ready to take the next step. The chemistry between Jim, Ray, Robbie, and John was undeniable. In August of 1966, the band signed with Elektra Records, and soon after, they entered Sunset Sound Studios to record their first album. Light My Fire hit #1 in July of 1967. This took the Doors to new heights neither of them could have imagined. At some point around the height of the Doors' fame, Jim spent time with Nico, the iconic singer from the Velvet Underground. Nico and Jim's relationship has been described as both intense and complicated. They shared a connection through their shared love for music, but their time together was often marked by emotional highs and lows. Nico, who had her own struggles with fame and addiction, was a kindred spirit of sorts, someone who understood Jim's inner turmoil, though their relationship was ultimately short-lived. Nico later recalled how Jim would disappear during their time together, much as he did with the band. It wasn't uncommon for him to shut himself off from the world entirely. retreating into his own headspace. For Nico, the experience of being with Jim was both captivating and draining. She had her own battles with addiction, and Jim's presence only amplified the tumult of her life. Despite the short-lived nature of their time together, Nico remained one of the few people who seemed to understand Jim's conflicting desires, his need for connection, and his desire to escape from it all. As the Doors' popularity rose, so did the tension between Jim and the rest of the band. While they were living the dream, performing in front of thousands and seeing their music top the charts, Jim continued to grapple with his own sense of self. His need to disappear for days at a time didn't sit well with the band, but they had no choice but to accept it. They knew that Jim's talent and charisma were the key to their success, and they were willing to ride the wave, even if it meant dealing with his erratic behavior. By the end of 1967, the Doors had already recorded their second album, Strange Days, which would further solidify their place in rock history. The album included tracks like People Are Strange and Love Me Two Times, continuing the trend of blending introspective lyrics with infectious melodies. Jim's introspection continued to influence the band's sound, though his emotional and mental state was growing increasingly difficult to manage. It was clear that the pressures of fame were beginning to take their toll on him. Throughout this period, the band's dynamic with Jim was complicated. Jim was the focal point of the band, but he often felt like an outsider within it. His unpredictability and frequent absences became more frequent, and though the band continued to make music, the cracks in their unity were starting to show. Jim's relationship with Pam Courson, his longtime girlfriend, also added to the emotional weight he carried. Their on-again, off-again relationship was filled with passion, but also dysfunction, and Jim's need for solitude often put a strain on it. The first crack in the Doors' seemingly perfect journey came during a performance at the New Haven Arena in 1967. Jim Morrison, known for his unpredictable behavior, got into a confrontation with the crowd. The details of what exactly transpired remain murky, but John Densmore in Riders on the Storm recalls the tensions of the night. Just before we went on stage that night, I had Vince move my drums back so that my ears were behind the amp line. I wasn't about to lose my hearing, even for these creeps, as I jokingly called Jim, Ray, and Robbie in the first bio for Elektra Records. After Vince moved my drums, he told me that Jim had been maced in one of the dressing rooms by a policeman. Apparently, Jim was chatting up a fan in a side room, and a cop came in and thought they were supposed to be in the audience. In his subtle Mr. Hyde manner, Jim had told the cop to fuck off. The policeman reacted by spraying Jim in the eyes. When Morrison came on stage, I could sense that something confrontational was going to happen. His eyes were red, and he looked mad. In the middle of Backdoor Man, Jim told the story of the backstage incident and started taunting the police who were standing directly in front of the stage, supposedly protecting us from the audience. The cops started turning around, frowning at Jim. Jim continued baiting the crowd like I never heard before, daring anyone to do something. 2 or 3 policemen came on stage from the sides and behind the back curtain. My heart started double timing. Jim stuck the microphone under the nose of one of the officers and said, "Say your thing, man." They started to drag Jim off, and I left the stage via the back curtain. The mood in the auditorium was getting hysterical, ugly, even violent. Standing in the wings, I thought that this is what war must feel like. I felt real panic in the air. Suddenly, Vince grabbed my arm, scaring me half to death. "What are they going to do with Jim?" he asked. I could hear the crowd starting to chant, "To the police station! To the police station! To the police station!" Ray came around the back and encouraged a few fans to go to the station. I gave Ray a worried look, and he responded with, "It's okay. A reporter from Life magazine is here tonight." I thought to myself, what about Jim? Are they going to beat the shit out of him? I was frightened. The group was too out of hand. Jim was crazy. And I wanted to escape from the growing fear that this was just the beginning. Ray later said that at the time, he too was worried that New Haven was the beginning of the erosion of everything we'd worked for. Just a couple of years later, in 1969, came the infamous Miami incident, a moment that would haunt Jim for the rest of his life. John, in Riders on the Storm, describes what happened from the view behind the drums. The Dinner Key Auditorium in Miami was sweltering with all those extra people they stuffed in by taking out the seats. It was 8:15 p.m. We were supposed to go on 15 minutes earlier, and there was still no sight of Jim. I was swearing at the fucker in my head. "Should we go on without him?" Robbie said. "No," I shouted, trying to stall for time. This weren't no sensitive European crowd. These people sounded rowdy, and I was sure they wanted the Doors with their hometown boys singing up front. I was livid. I busied myself with a drummer's stretching exercise, holding my arms straight out with the butt end of my sticks together in the palms of my hands and twisting my wrists upside down. Finally, Vince came running up the stairs to the dressing room shouting, "He's here!" I turned my back in order not to have eye contact as I felt the presence of someone coming into the room with an entirely different vibration from everyone else. You could literally feel the chaos. It's what the press people called charisma. I call it psychosis. I didn't look at Jim because I was afraid of him. I was so mad I wanted to punch him, and at the same time, I was scared of saying anything hostile to him. When one gains so much power that others, friends as well as strangers, are afraid to comment on one's excesses, trouble lies ahead. Robbie frowned at sit-ins, and Ray, usually the patient one, just mumbled, "Let's do it." Jim was drunk on his ass. It feels like there's an elephant in the room, but you don't mention it. You go around it. There's elephant shit everywhere, but you pretend it's not there. "What do you guys want to play?" I said. "Let's start with Backdoor Man, okay?" Everyone nodded, and we headed for the stage. I didn't push for more songs because there wasn't time. I usually couldn't get agreement past 3 songs anyway. As we descended the stairs, it felt like entering a sauna, Dante's Inferno. Later, I was to find out that there were over 13,000 people stuffed into the place, meant to hold 7,000. Vince had hired some locals to stand at the door with metal customer counters. As we stepped onto the stage, Vince warned us that it was poorly constructed. Ray sets the scene. John, Robbie, and I didn't know what Jim would do. We'd follow him into the jaws of the hellhound itself, if we had to. 'Cause this is Jim, this is our man, this is our main man, the poet. We started Backdoor Man, and Jim sang a few lines and suddenly stopped. We vamped for a while, but soon petered out. Then Jim went into a drunken rap. "You're all a bunch of fucking idiots. You let people tell you what you're gonna do. Let people push you around. You love it, don't you? Maybe you love getting your face shoved in shit. You're all a bunch of slaves. What are you gonna do about it? What are you gonna do?" I wanted to turn into liquid and dissolve into the spaces between my drums. I had never heard such rage directed at an audience. He continued, "Hey, I'm not talking about revolution. I'm not talking about no demonstration. I'm talking about having some fun. I'm talking about dancing. I'm talking about love your neighbor till it hurts. I'm talking about grab your friend. I'm talking about some love. Grab your friend. And love it, if only I could have melted down and hid behind my bass drum. I was small enough to fit down there if I crouched. I didn't move. Jim's inspiration came from seeing Julian and Judith, Melina Beck's Living Theater, a few nights previously at the University of Southern California. They were a confrontational performance group that got Jim's creative juices flowing again and scared the shit out of me. Jim had gotten tickets for everybody around our office. He really wanted us to see what they were up to. Bill Siddons recalls, "It was theater of confrontations, and Jim was profoundly affected by how real this made people become. Because, in fact, it probably best reflected what Jim was really all about. He did things to provoke people, because he felt you got the person down to their nitty-gritty, and you dealt with it." At the Living Theater performance, actors wore a minimal amount of clothing, G-strings and the like, and climbed up the aisles and over the audience, shouting, "No passports, no borders, paradise now." I was intimidated. Jim was elated. "Hey, what are you all doing here? You want music?" "No, that's not what you really want." "All right, I want to see some action up here. I want to see some people up here having some fun. I want to see some dancing. There are no rules, no limits, no laws. Come on. Won't somebody come up here and love my ass? Come on. I'm lonely up here. I need some love." He bowed his head, and I thought of Pam. Now I felt sad and embarrassed for Jim. He shouldn't show that much vulnerability. Miami was one of Jim's last attempts to get a new creative spark going and to quell the demons that had him off center from birth. Demons, like Lenny Bruce's, that told of a sick world in need of a comedian or an exorcist. Jim had intensified his quest with existential reading, psychedelics, and alcohol. Like his romantic idols Nietzsche and Rimbaud, he had glamorized death. Writing and performing seemed to be the only things that abated Jim's angst. Jim's behavior was unpredictable, and in Ray's telling, the incident marked the beginning of a shift. He was no longer just a troubled rock star. His actions were beginning to overshadow the music itself. The fallout from Miami was significant. Jim faced charges, and the band's reputation took a hit. As Ray mentions, the Miami incident pushed Jim further into the depths of self-destruction. He had always been a difficult person to deal with, but now his behavior was creating problems for the entire band. In the wake of the Miami incident and growing frustrations with his lifestyle, Jim decided to leave the United States and move to Paris in 1971. Jim's personal life had become increasingly turbulent, and he felt disconnected from the band and the fame that had once fueled him. Pam Courson, his longtime girlfriend, accompanied him to Paris, and the two sought a quieter life away from the chaos of Los Angeles. On July 3, 1971, Jim Morrison was found dead in his Paris apartment. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but the circumstances surrounding his death remain a mystery to this day. Stephen Davis in Jim Morrison. Life, Death, Legend suggests that Jim's death was the result of years of excess, alcohol, drugs, and the emotional toll of his lifestyle. Davis argues that Jim had pushed his body to its limits, and the death was the tragic culmination of his self-destructive habits. There are several theories about what happened that night. Some believe Jim died from a heroin overdose, which would not have been unusual given his history of substance abuse. Others, including conspiracy theorists, claim that Jim faked his death to escape the pressures of fame. However, the most widely accepted theory is that Jim's heart simply gave out after years of drug and alcohol abuse, a conclusion that fits with the behavior that preceded his death. Despite the mystery surrounding his death, Jim Morrison's legacy is undeniable. He remains one of the most iconic figures in rock and roll history, his music continuing to inspire new generations. The Doors were a groundbreaking band, and Jim was the heart and soul of that sound. His lyrics were deeply philosophical, and his voice was a unique blend of raw emotion and poetic depth. Songs like Light My Fire, Break On Through to the Other Side, and Riders on the Storm remain timeless anthems that resonate with listeners to this day. Jim's influence extends beyond music. His persona as the Lizard King and his rebellious nature made him a symbol of counterculture, representing a rejection of societal norms. In Set the Night on Fire, Robbie Krieger emphasizes how Jim's willingness to push boundaries and challenge authority was a defining characteristic of both his music and his persona. Even now, young people continue to gravitate toward Jim Morrison's message of individuality and freedom. The myth of Jim Morrison, both the man and the rock star, has only grown in the decades since his death. His image continues to captivate, and his music remains as relevant as ever. The Doors' legacy is not just in their music, but in the way Jim Morrison's life and death embodied the spirit of rebellion and artistic freedom that continues to inspire musicians, poets, and dreamers around the world. Jim Morrison may have been a man torn between fame and solitude, but his music has lived on as a beacon for those seeking freedom of expression. If you've been inspired by Jim's life and legacy, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into rock legends, and let us know in the comments. How do you think Jim's music continues to shape the world today? Was he a poet, a drunk, a visionary? Yes, and that's why we still talk about him more than 50 years later.